Hello everyone and welcome back to Set 6, and today what I want to do is I want to briefly go over some information that's dropped recently. So we've had a fair bit of information that's dropped as far as the characters. So we've had character profiles and things like that have dropped on the Final Fantasy VII website. Now, there is a fair amount of speculation to be done surrounding Vice the Immaculate. That is going to be a separate video. There's too much to do in a quick video like this, so I'll definitely be coming back to that one, but that one is going to get its own video probably in the next couple of weeks. There are a couple of things that I want to look at though. The first thing comes from this information dump that we've had regarding Final Fantasy VII Remake and the characters of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And it comes from the character information of one of the characters that's going to be assisting Yuffie in the intermission DLC, and that character's name is Polk. Now, there's a lot of talk about these names. They do sound daft, but they also definitely sound like they could be code names. So while they do sound silly, I don't think this guy's parents have bullied him so much to call him Polk. And Billy Bob, come on. But yeah, Polk, in his character information, it talks about a game that he plays, which is a popular board game that's taken Midgard by storm, and it's called Fort Condor. And this has led to rampant speculation. And most of the speculation is taking the form of, what does this mean for Fort Condor? Like, has Fort Condor been cut? Now, personally, I don't think Fort Condor has been cut. I think it's too important of a location to be cut completely from the game. Do I think the Fort Condor minigame's been cut? Probably. A lot of people, I don't know. I know a fairly decent number of people aren't the biggest fan of the Fort Condor minigame. A lot of people don't like a lot of the minigames in Final Fantasy VII. They see them as a barrier, as a problem that they have to get past, and I never really ascribed to that mindset. I've always been quite the fan of the Final Fantasy VII minigames. I don't really have an issue with them. I mean, snowboarding's pretty cool. Come on, let's be honest. Someone massively important to you's just been killed and the end of the world's coming. What better thing is there to do? Jump on a snowboard and go for it. But no, in all seriousness, I don't get the complaints that people have regarding Final Fantasy VII minigames. I quite enjoyed them. But, like I say, a lot of people didn't. So it is likely that we are going to see not necessarily a trimming down of the minigames. I do think we'll probably end up with a similar number of minigames in Final Fantasy VII Remake. I just think that they're going to remove them from story critical positions. Like, you have to do the Fort Condor minigame at least twice, I think it is. You have your first visit there, you have to do it then. And then you have the huge materia mission, you have to do it then. I think those instances are going to be removed completely. And the only way that, if you want to play the Fort Condor minigame, is to go and play this board game. I don't know how they're going to implement it. I'm a bit shocked that it wasn't in the original remake, like in the actual game. But that does kind of indicate to me that it's something that they've reached that point of development, where they're doing Fort Condor potentially. And they've kind of sat there and realised, like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. We can't do this. This isn't going to work. So they've looked at an alternative, and that alternative is to give it us as this kind of minigame, and that's why we're getting it in the DLC now, because they probably did have intentions of keeping Fort Condor as it was, but it's turned out, no, we can't do that, so let's do this instead. That's my take on it. Is Fort Condor going to be cut? No. I would be shocked if they cut Fort Condor as an area. Not the minigame, but the area. It's really important in establishing certain things about Shinra. It gives you that feeling that, so Shinra aren't just being dicks in Midgard. Right, they're doing it everywhere. And yeah, it definitely helps with fleshing out the world of Final Fantasy VII. In a big way, in that early part of the game. I would be shocked if they cut Fort Condor as an area. I would be very shocked. But this minigame doesn't really shock me. I can see what's happened there. They've been in the process of development. They've realised, nope, we can't do this. Let's do this instead. We could see that Fort Condor gets cut entirely, and at that point I'll be pretty disappointed, but I don't think that's going to happen. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about really briefly is there was the concert a few months ago where everyone thought there was going to be DLC announced and a Tifa DLC and a definitive edition and all that sort of business. But one thing that people did get was, if you paid for the tickets, you also received like a little pamphlet sort of thing, and it was called Midgard News, and it's had a few little bits of. There's definitely hints in there. There's definitely some spoilery stuff in there, and I'm going to look through them a bit more. They've all been translated, as per usual, by the phenomenal Audrey over on Twitter. Again, if you're not following her, what are you doing with your life? Get over there. But one thing that I've noticed, just in a cursory glance at these things, is, well, there's a little section that talks about weather across all of Gaia, it would seem. You know, it's got information for Midgard, Junon, Costa del Sol, Wutai, and Gongaga. So that's a lot of the locations, covers 3 of the 4 continents, and yeah, it just seems like it's a general newsy type thing. But you've got the usual columns that are to do with weather, and then you've got one more column, and it's almost in place of, you know, like a pollen count or a smog warning or something like that. It could be either. Now, I'm going to go into that in a second. But this column is for Mako. And one of the really interesting things about it is it's showing rates. So you've got high, medium, low. And Midgard and Junon obviously have got high rate. It makes sense that Junon's got a high rate of Mako. But there's one other area that's got a high rate of Mako, and that is Costa del Sol. And that stands out as quite weird to me. I don't get that. And there's 2 ways of looking at it. Now, Audrey, I did actually comment on Audrey's post, and Audrey kind of indicated to me that it is highlighting Mako consumption. Now, if that's the case, and I have no reason to doubt that that is the case, why does Costa del Sol have comparable Mako consumption to Midgard and Junon? Because if you think back to the original game, Midgard, massive sprawling city. Obviously, it's going to have a high consumption. You get to Junon, and while it's not as big as Midgard, it is still quite a large town, city sort of thing. And you've also got military activity there. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on at Junon. Again, makes perfect sense that there's a high Mako consumption there. You get to Costa del Sol, you've got the house, the big mansion, you've got a bar, you've got a little shack, which is an item shop, and then you've got the beach. That's pretty much it. And a port as well, sorry. You've also got the port there. I suppose that you could maybe say that due to the port facility being there, that pushes the Mako consumption up, but I can't see it being a port facility that causes that. You know, you've got boats coming in, unloading, loading. That's it. So yeah, I'm intrigued by this. If it is Mako consumption, I mean, even if it's not, the other thing that I think it could be is, like I was alluding to slightly earlier, is that it could be similar to a pollen count. So in the area, there is a high abundance of Mako. Again, would make sense for Midgard, because even though the area is pretty desolate, there is going to be a lot of Mako floating about in the atmosphere just purely because of the amount of Mako reactors there are, just pumping that, well, just drinking that energy up and using it. So I would expect there to be, in the same way that in a city where there's a lot of cars burning fuel, you get a lot of pollution. Same thing with Mako. The energy's being used, you get a lot of Mako dissipated throughout, you know, the biosphere. Similar with Junon, again, large amounts of Mako being used, gets disseminated through the biosphere. Why is that happening at Costa del Sol? And whichever of the 2 it is, whether it is consumption or whether it is just the abundance of Mako in the atmosphere or in the area, whichever it is, why is that number so high for Costa del Sol? There's not a reactor in Costa del Sol. I would assume that Costa del Sol gets its Mako energy from probably North Coral, potentially the underwater reactor at Junon, probably North Coral. I know logistically it's probably easier to get the energy from Coral to Costa del Sol than it is from the bottom of the ocean near Junon to Costa del Sol. So yeah, I'd assume Costa del Sol's getting its energy from Coral, so the reactor's nowhere near. So what is it that's causing either this abundance of Mako in the area or this massive consumption? And I think there's got to be some sort of facility or something at Costa del Sol. Now, what type of facility that's going to be is completely up in the air. Like, no idea, because there wasn't anything like that at Costa del Sol in the original game. In the original game, the most that you had the mansion there, and you also had like a little meeting with Hojo on the beach. That was it. Rufus spends, 2 minutes there, makes Heidegger feel like an idiot and flies off. So it feels, in the original game at least, that there's nothing of significance at Costa del Sol. It is purely just a stop. You go there, you do this, you move. That's it. And that's all anyone seems to do, other than going there to holiday, of course. And in the Midgard news article, there are advertisements for, like beachfront vacations and things like that. So there is a strong possibility that Costa del Sol is going to get a big upgrade. And it could just be that they turn Costa del Sol from like this beachside town resort into a beachside city resort, and that's where the consumption comes from. But I feel like there's got to be more to it. The fact that they've put it in this little article that's giving out to certain people and it's not being massively publicised, I feel like there's got to be something there. I feel like this is like a little sneaky hint for people. But what about you? Why do you think Costa del Sol has got such a high Mako consumption? Is it just that it's been expanded as a town, or is there something a bit more sneaky going on there? Because we have seen events happen in the area of Costa del Sol. There were events in Before Crisis that happen around Costa del Sol, but they tend to happen on boats around the area from what I can understand. So again, there's no mention of a facility at Costa del Sol. Not that I've seen. I could have missed something. I don't think I have, but I could have missed something. And also, do you think Fort Condor has been cut from Final Fantasy VII Remake, or do you think that this is just kind of separating the minigame from the main story? I think it's that. I think it is separating the minigame from the main story, and we'll still go to Fort Condor. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe for future content, but more importantly than anything, have a great day.